Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nancy Wodrago. I'm with the University of Illinois Extension. We're happy to host another BEAD deep dive with the Illinois Office of Broadband and the Illinois Broadband Lab. We are happy to welcome back Devin Braunstein, who will kick off today's session as well and introduce the program and the additional guest presenters. Welcome, Devin, and thank you for being here, and you can take it from here.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. For those of you I don't know, my name is Devin Bronstein, and I lead the Illinois Office of Broadband. So this is the sort of first session in our new weekly webinar series that focuses on breaking down the BEAD program, different elements of the Notice of Funding Opportunity, and some topics that might be different from previous Connect Illinois rounds. So each of these Wednesday sessions will kind of dive into 1 to 2 topics. We'll have some guest speakers, opportunities for questions, and any input that you have will kind of help us as we finalize that Notice of Funding Opportunity or NOFO, as well as build out our supplemental materials, our FAQs, and all of the sort of resources that we can create to support you in your application process. So let's dive in. Our topic for today is the scoring criteria and how we will go about scoring applications. So again, just context for the webinar, we will focus on different pieces of our Notice of Funding Opportunity with the goal of helping to make sure that prospective applicants are familiar and comfortable with these concepts ahead of the sub-grantee selection process. A couple of topics for discussion today. We'll do a recap of the BEAD program, share where we are in terms of our progress towards launching that sub-grantee process. We'll go through the BEAD-funded Connect Illinois Round 4 review process, so the different waves and what that means. And then finally, we'll do a bit of a deep dive into the Round 4 scoring criteria. So this is something in our initial proposal, Volume 2, that we will walk through with even more details to come. So quick background for anyone that is new here. BEAD is a $42 billion program. It's an investment from the Biden administration in making sure that all American households have access to high-speed internet. So the goal is to deploy capital funds to connect every unserved and underserved household in the country. And Illinois specifically was awarded $1.04 billion to achieve this universal coverage. So a couple of reminders on what this involves and requires. We'll have to prioritize unserved households, then underserved households, and then community anchor institutions without access to gigabit symmetrical service. We also need to prioritize the use of end-to-end fiber technology, but also with the opportunity to accept applications for fixed, wireless, and other technologies as well. We'll require coverage of multi-dwelling units, not just to the front door, but to every single unit. We will run a 1-year sub-grantee selection process, followed by 4 years of project implementation, wrapping up this whole initiative within 5 years. And then we will focus on broadband affordability. So there will be a requirement to include an affordable plan, as well as you'll hear today about how we will award more points based on the affordability of the plans offered. So here's the high-level timeline, hopefully relatively familiar to folks by now. Where we are is we kind of wrapped up accepting submissions for the pre-qualification process, which, as a reminder, was an opportunity for those who are considering applying to kind of start the process early, submit qualifying materials that demonstrate their ability to deploy a broadband network, both from a technical, financial, and operational standpoint. So I think we have gotten back to most of those 41 applicants with initial or second round feedback. So at the end of that process, you will either have our kind of preliminary sign off on your materials, so you know that those materials are all set to use in the formal application window, or you have received good feedback that you can then incorporate in what you do submit during that formal application window. So appreciate everyone who's been getting back to us in that 7-day window. Know that we are working hard on our end with our merit review team to continue that cycle. as we prep for the formal application. And then our sub-grantee selection process, we're anticipating that it will start in mid to late October. This will depend on NTIA approving our final BEAD map data, which will then need to pull into our map, sort of rebuild those project area units based on any tweaks from the challenge process, and then publish that with at least 30 days before the application window opens. So we'll open that sub-grantee process. We'll talk in a bit about the 3 waves that come after that. And then once we run that full sub-grantee selection process, we have our provisional winners. We'll pull all of that into a final proposal and submit it to NTIA, who will give us sign off and allow us to get started on deployment. So now I will hand it off to John Wilkins to talk us through our actual process, how we will go through these 3 waves.
Okay, thanks, Devin. So next 2 sections, we're going to walk through step by step everything that happens between middle of October and when final awards actually will be arrived at. And just as an intro, so BEAD is a federal program that is implemented by the states, and that's actually a very particularly important point of emphasis. BEAD is not just federal money that then every state gets to do whatever it wants with. BEAD actually, it is federal money, and it's a lot of federal money, but it actually at the federal level has a lot of specific requirements in the federal law, and then those have been interpreted by NTIA, the Commerce Department. So what you will see in every state and in Illinois is a program that reflects in one part a number of just federal requirements that are mandatory under the federal law, and then a number of implementation choices where every state is able to essentially make a bit of its own judgments. And so therefore the Illinois process, essentially Illinois interpretations of areas where there's flexibility about exactly how to implement it. So as we go through, I'll sort of highlight, which ones are federal requirements, which ones are state, and that doesn't really matter that much. I mean, these are going to be the rules for Illinois, but there are certain things where this is just how the federal rules work, and therefore it didn't have a lot of flexibility for the state. But anyway, let's walk them through, and let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, thanks. Okay, so highest level, BEAD in Illinois is going to go through what we're going to call waves. So it's a three-wave process.
Hey, John, your service is a little bit choppy. Not
but
sure.
Right now, what to really focus on are really waves 1.
John, your service is a little
Sorry,
choppy
say that again?
for me. Your service is a little in and out.
Oh, okay. Let me. Okay, here, let me kill my video. Maybe that's part of it.
Okay.
How's that? Is that
It seems
okay?
Fine for now.
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. So three waves in Illinois. Really, for the moment, let's focus really on waves 1 and 2. So when Devin said that the process will start on middle October, that's when wave 1 will start. Very important thing, and this is a choice that Illinois has made. Illinois, the first bite at the apple, the first look at awards, is going to focus on what we're calling hard to serve areas. So there'll be some more specific definitions of that coming out in the next little while. But essentially, these will be the areas in Illinois that are BEAD eligible, but are particularly high cost, hard to serve. Essentially, the classic areas where, despite lots of past efforts, past programs, service has been provided. And so, while any technology, any applications are welcome in wave 1, wave 1 is only going to initially consider those that include hard to serve areas. But again, there'll be more information coming out exactly what that means and where they are. Okay. That will then be followed by wave 2, which the way to think about wave 2 is that really it's the main round. I mean, that's when essentially every area applications will come in, there'll be awards considered. And the wave three is the reason it's called optional is because the state essentially needs some flexibility to see what happens in waves 1 and 2. If there are sufficient applications covering all the areas, and maybe the job will be done after wave 2, if there still are some areas that did not yet get applications after wave 2, then wave 3 becomes kind of the optional way to try to reach everyone with one last wave. A couple other things to say. So a federal requirement for BEAD is that fiber comes first. And so there is a particular definition under BEAD that's called a priority broadband project that is defined as 100% end-to-end fiber. So it is fiber to the last mile, to the home, everywhere in the entire build. Under the federal rules, essentially states always have to select a priority project if one is available, as long as there is enough funding. And we'll talk about that a bit more as we go. But the implication of that for wave 1 is that the only initial selections in wave 1 will be those that A, include the hard to serve areas, and 2, that are priority end-to-end fiber. Now, other technology types are welcome to put in applications starting in wave 1. Those can just flow into wave 2. Wave 2 will be much more likely all technologies, and it really just depends on what applications are received. But wave 1 is the initial focus. Hard to serve areas is fiber only for the selections, and then that will then go into wave 2, what is more of the main overall round. Okay, let's go and go to the next slide because we have a few important definitions on the next slide. I'm going to go through each of these one by one, just because they are the fundamental building blocks of the whole program. So upper left, a project area unit, a PAU. Hopefully a lot of you listening to this are already very familiar with PAUs. So these are collections of underserved locations and CAIs. In other words, collections of BEAD eligible locations. These have been essentially grouped into relatively small groupings of reasonably clustered locations that collectively represent all of the eligible locations in the state. That's been available for lots of input, RFI. I mean, these have been available for the last couple of months. So again, hopefully everyone has started to look at them. But the key aspect of a PAU is if you apply for a PAU in your BEAD application and you are awarded, the fundamental obligation is you will deploy to all of the eligible locations in that PAU. So a PAU is the indefeasible atomic unit of the BEAD program in Illinois. Okay, that then builds into a project area. So a project area is the combination of one or more PAUs that comprise an application. Okay, so in Illinois, you will submit an application, more than one application, right? You have a lot of flexibility to put in more than one application if that's your business goal. But each application is fundamentally defined as a set of one or more PAUs. You have a lot of flexibility. They do not have to be contiguous PAUs, for example. The only real rule is you cannot subdivide a PAU. A PAU is the atomic unit. Okay, a priority broadband project, I talked about that. So that means it is a project that is 100% end-to-end fiber. And then going down to the lower left, so just to talk about fiber for a second, if you have even one link in the network that is not fiber, it's still a desirable BEAD project, but it no longer meets the federal requirement of a priority broadband project. Instead, it falls into the second bucket called reliable broadband service. So reliable broadband service includes essentially a lot of the other standard technologies. So non-100% fiber, but still fiber-based, cable modem, HFC, licensed fixed wireless. And again, that is a federal definition. License means either actually FCC license. It also includes the CBRS based networks that's been deemed to be a license by rule. So these are all NTIA definitions. And essentially what this means is under the federal requirements, if a priority project is available and there's sufficient funding, the state has to pick a priority project over any other projects. If only reliable services are available, then those reliable services are what can be selected. And then the third category of the BEAD eligible networks are what are called alternative technology. This is really two categories. It is fixed wireless using only unlicensed spectrum. So essentially the 2.4 or 5.9 or other unlicensed, or the low LEO satellite, Starlink. For in terms of current availability, we're talking about Starlink there. So alternative technologies, they ultimately are eligible for BEAD, but under the NTIA hierarchy that's established, you only can select those if there is no other either reliable option or priority option. And we'll talk about this more as we go. Last definitional concept, the very roll off your tongue EHCPLT, the extremely high cost per location threshold. I'll define this, but then I will just say I'm going to define it, and then we're not going to worry about it a whole lot until sometime after wave 2. What the HCPLT is under the federal BEAD rules is it is a specific cost per location for an application. So it's a dollar figure that each state has established procedures for when and how it will establish what that dollar figure is. And the meaning of that dollar figure is if a state, so if Illinois has a lot of applications and says, well, I have all these fiber applications that are available in these areas, I'd like to select them, but they add up to more than the $1.04 billion total that Devin mentioned, then the high cost location threshold is the mechanism by which a state can say, even though there is a fiber application here, a priority application, that under the basic rules, I always have to choose it over a non-fiber application. If that application is above the threshold that I've set, meaning essentially it is too expensive for my total budget, then I no longer have to choose the fiber application. Okay, so it is a very specific thing. It relieves the state from the mandatory obligation to select the priority project that's available. Now, one last thing I'll say before we move on to the next couple of slides. That doesn't mean that the fiber application cannot be selected. It just means that it no longer has to be selected. So if Illinois does get into this particular situation where the high cost location threshold is having to be used, what that really just means is there will be more flexibility for the state to first work with the fiber applications in an area and see if there are ways to reduce the cost. Maybe still choose a given fiber one if it really is the best option. In other areas, money can be saved, but it essentially just gives the state a lot more leeway to not always choose fiber if it is too expensive. Okay, let's go ahead and move on then. And so just to put this hierarchy of projects on the one slide that I talked about a little bit. So under the federal BEAD required prioritization of available projects, a priority broadband project, 100% end-to-end fiber, if available, always is preferred. And just to emphasize one more point, even if that priority broadband project is not the highest score in an area. So in a given area, you may have a priority broadband project and 2 reliable broadband projects. One of the reliable projects may have a higher score under the scoring rubric that we'll talk about here in a minute. That doesn't matter. Under the BEAD rules, the priority one has to be selected unless there's not enough money, and that's the high cost location threshold topic. Okay. One other thing, by the way, if there is more than one priority broadband project in an area, then in a sense, those are only evaluated against each other. The scoring is used, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about on the rest of this call and some of the ones to follow. So if there's multiple priority projects in an area, then it's resolved according to the scoring rules. Okay, if there is not a priority broadband project in the area, then the next tier that has to be selected over lesser tiers is this reliable category. So in a sense, that's all of the other primary terrestrial licensed technologies. So cable HFC, partial fiber, licensed fixed wireless, those are all essentially the same from a categorization and prioritization standpoint. So if there are multiple of those categories, they are scored against each other the same way. And then the lowest tier, and again, this is a federal requirement, and just to say one more word about this, the most important aspect of BEAD is BEAD has the requirement that every state show that it has a plan and then a result to reach every eligible location in the state. Like literally to the last one. It's not a pretty close, it's not a 99%, it is every last location. And in many states, we'll see what happens in Illinois. It is possible that, especially given that it is that ubiquitous of a requirement, there may be some locations, hopefully not very many, that despite all of the efforts, all of the applications that are received, all of the money, you may have some number of locations that just did not receive any interest, any applications at all from either a priority project or a reliable project. And NTIA actually just this week has put out some new draft specific guidance about how states then handle that. The bottom line is, if in that absolute last ditch scenario, the only option is these alternative technologies, so the unlicensed fixed wireless or the LEO satellite, then there are procedures by which a state, in order to reach that final 100% goal, is permitted to use some amount of the BEAD money to make awards to those. But under both the overall federal requirements and the way Illinois is interpreting them, that is the last option after trying all others in these higher categories. Okay, so just to then sum up, and then we're going to turn to some of the scoring rules to go into that level of detail. You have these three categories. Priority fiber always is first. Non-priority other terrestrial is second. Alternative is last. If you have multiple versions in each of those categories, that really is it for a given area. That then is when the scoring and all the other rules come into play. So that's what we're turning to now. How does the state score competing applications in an area that are all at one of these tiers? And a lot more to be said about that. So I guess I'm going to turn it back to Devin to go through those.
Thanks, John. All right. So shifting gears to the BEAD or Connect Illinois round for scoring criteria. So in this section, we'll essentially talk through the scoring rubric that is outlined in the state's initial proposal, volume 2. We'll talk through kind of each of the different elements there, the percentage of points associated with each one, and then run through a couple of examples of what it actually will look like in practice. Then we'll do a quick crosswalk of scoring criteria, comparing the criteria from round 3 and then BEAD round 4. So over the next few slides, we'll kind of break down this overall scoring rubric. We'll talk through how each criteria is applied, along with some of those examples. So this slide shows the bird's eye view of the scoring rubric. You'll see that the criteria are broken down into 2 buckets here, primary and secondary. This doesn't mean too much outside of just how NTIA required us to structure the rubric. So the primary criteria were all required through the BEAD program by NTIA, and this first section had to sum to at least 75% of the total points. The secondary category are some BEAD stipulated criteria and then some criteria that were kind of offered, recommended, but it was up to the states to decide what they wanted to include. So that is kind of how we came to that second segment here of the secondary criteria. So you'll see that the first bucket here totals to 80% and the second bucket totals to 20%, which sums to 100%. So the first slide here is essentially how much funding is the applicant putting in, the non-state match. And this is important because it shows skin in the game. So you can see here that while 25% match is required for the BEAD program to be competitive and earn points, we're looking at least 30% match. So if you do put forth 25%, which is less than 30%, you'll meet the program criteria, but you won't earn those extra points. So the most competitive applications will be putting in 30% or higher of a non-state match. Know that the match waiver is still an applicable tool that we can use in our toolkit here, particularly for those high cost locations. And once we get to wave 3 and we're looking at locations that might not have received any interest and are just too expensive to put forth any sort of match. So to share a quick example here, let's say an applicant submits a bid for a BEAD award. Their total budget is $20 million. They request $12 million, and they put forth a non-state match of $8 million. So $8 million as a percentage of their total project cost is 40%. And so every percentage range aligns with a point score. So 40% is between 40 and 44.9, which equates to 8 points. So this applicant would earn 8 points for this scoring category. Before I move on, want to offer it up to John to add any other color here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one, or actually maybe 2 points. So especially for folks listening to this that have been looking at BEAD and even BEAD maybe in a couple states, including Illinois. Match is a little bit tricky sometimes under BEAD. Okay, so first point, there is a fundamental federal requirement that a BEAD grant has a 25% match associated with it, absent a waiver from NTIA. So that's just a baseline requirement that applies in all states, including Illinois. But that's a baseline requirement that is not necessarily required to be a scoring element that goes to the selection of a winning application. So what Illinois then has done is said, in addition to that baseline 25% requirement that applies to all BEAD states, as Devin said, for sort of the skin in the game value and the specific evidence around what the match is, this is a distinct other element, which is every application will have associated with it both a BEAD funding request as well as a proposed budget for the project, so that the math that Devin just walked through can be done. And again, if you're looking in multiple states, some states are doing this match scoring, some are not. Illinois is. And just the thing to start thinking about is what that means is if you're going to be submitting applications, in addition to figuring out what is the BEAD funding that you're requesting, you're also going to need to have a complete total budget for the project. And every application you submit in Illinois will have to have that budget associated with it. Now, there'll be some additional information coming out that'll provide some templates and some definitions of that. It'll be a formal part of the application process. But we just wanted to highlight that because it's a little bit of an extra planning thing you're going to need to do as you start thinking about exactly where you want to apply. But otherwise, I mean, the math here I think is pretty straightforward, and I think everyone understands it. But just the implication of this is you do have to develop a complete budget for the project, not just your BEAD funding request as part of your application.
Sean. All right, so moving on to the second scoring criteria here. This is where we'll look at your BEAD program outlay, which is just another way of saying the subsidy that you're requesting from the state. So of your project total cost, we talked about your match, what the applicant sort of is willing to contribute. And so what is the rest? What is the actual requested subsidy from the state? The way that we score this is by comparing it to a reference cost for each project area unit. And we do this by dividing the requested amount, so the requested outlay, the subsidy, by the reference cost, which is assigned to each project area unit or PAU. And this generates a percentage. This percentage, similar to the last bucket, is then linked to a point value. And we know that most applications will likely include more than one project area unit. So we will look at the reference cost of the total project area, which is calculated by taking a sum of the reference cost for all of the PAUs in that area. And the reference cost is based on the technology. So you'll have a reference cost for that area for fiber, for fixed wireless, etc. We will be publishing a reference cost for each PAU, again, both under fiber and non-fiber technology, so you can sort of run some scenarios and understand where your application might fall based on your projected costs. This will be available before the sub-grantee process, but basically it'll be based on the cost quest net present value estimation, assuming that this is a net new build out.
And then maybe Devin, I'll add one more thing here as well. Just real strong point of emphasis. The reference cost for the PAUs, they are not intended, nor will they operate as a cap, as a ceiling. This is not the state saying we're never going to provide a grant above this reference cost. What the reference cost is used for is a way to have a normalized baseline for assessing scores. And in particular, it's because the Illinois process gives applicants a lot of flexibility to define their project areas in different combinations of units. What is very likely to happen is the state will get 3 or 4 applications in the same general area, but maybe application 1 will include a few other PAUs that are maybe higher cost, and the second one will include some different ones. And because the cost levels really do vary a lot in these eligible areas, to be able to fairly score application 1 against application 2, if it doesn't have exactly the same units in it, this reference cost is essentially a normalized baseline to say, this application, even though it might have asked for more BEAD money, is a better offer relative to this benchmark cost than application 2 that might have asked for less money, but actually is in a lower cost area. So that is what it is used for. It is a scoring mechanism to allow the state to reasonably compare funding requests across overlapping areas that don't include exactly the same locations. And by the way, quite a few states are using this approach, but just it's not a limit, it's not a cap. There easily will be situations where final sub-grant in some of these areas may be above the reference cost, essentially because that was the best offer that the state received.
Thanks, John. All right. Our next category here is affordability. So this category establishes 2 monthly reference prices. Note that this is different than the reference cost. So this is a monthly reference price for what an applicant would plan to charge for broadband service to customers. So there is one option for priority broadband projects, meaning that fully fiber, end-to-end fiber project, and then another reference price for non-fiber projects. So the score is based on the price an applicant offers for either gig symmetrical or 100/20, again, based on that technology, and how it relates to that monthly reference price. So for priority broadband projects, the reference price is $100 a month for gig symmetrical service. And for other technologies, it's $30 for 100/20 megabits per second. And the points are calculated by looking at how far the proposed monthly price is from the reference price and in what direction. If it's lower than the reference price, more points are awarded. And if it's higher, fewer points are awarded. So everything is starting at a 7.5 baseline, and then you can either go up from there or down from there. So there's an example on the right side. If a proposal is to charge $75 per month for gig service, we subtract 75 from 100, which is 25%. So we see that we're going in that positive direction for points. We then multiply that baseline of 7.5 by 25% and add it to the baseline of 7.5 to get the points total. So you can see that this is the points are going up. And note that the points can be capped at 15 or can't go higher than 15 and can't go higher, lower than 0. So you don't need to do this math, but if you want to understand kind of how our merit review team and our scoring template will be calculating points awarded based on how close they are to the monthly reference price on the back end and run those scenarios, this is the calculation that we will use. Next category here in the primary scoring criteria is around fair labor practices. So this one is a bit more straightforward, looking at what you have in your application. Basically, we'll be looking at any history of compliance with labor laws and workforce requirements, future plans for compliance, plus the option to submit a project labor agreement or PLA. So note that projects with a total cost of over $10 million are required to provide a certification that the project includes a PLA, but sub-grantees that cannot certify this will have an alternative to submit a project workforce continuity plan that kind of details out some of these things. So if a project does include a PLA, it will earn points, and more on this will be covered in detail with our Labor Council in our September 11th webinar. So just an example here, if an applicant does not submit a PLA, but they're newly established, so they don't have any prior violations, and they submit a really clear commitment and plan for how they will comply with workforce safety and labor laws. So this could be specific trainings, processes, practices, certifications around workforce safety. They would receive no points for number 1, and they would receive full points for numbers 2 and 3. All right, moving on to our secondary category, just a few more, and then we can close out and open it up for questions. So the first category here in our secondary section is speed to deployment. All BEAD projects are required to be completed within 4 years of that grant agreement executed. And so this scoring criteria gives the opportunity for applicants to demonstrate that they can deploy and complete that project even quicker within 2 years of the executed grant agreement. So the way that our merit review team will evaluate this is look at those PE certified network designs and plans to make sure that they can actually achieve what they set out to achieve and what the applicant includes in their application. So we'll require a build-out timeline, milestones, capital investment schedule, and kind of use all of that to verify that what you are planning to do actually lines up with what seems possible. This will then be in your sub-grantee agreement. So there is some level of accountability that if you commit to completing the project in 2 years, we will expect that you do that. So you can see an example on the right. The applicant commits to an 18-month deployment completion timeline, and the PE certified timeline milestones and plans demonstrate this and back it up. Then this project would get that full 3 points. In this next one, speed of network and technical capabilities, this is worth 4 points of the scoring weight. Points will be awarded based on performance levels and scalability of networks, specifically the best available speed after the build. So we know that BEAD requires any project to offer at least 100/20 Mbps. And so what this category does is it awards more points for the ability for projects to offer either 100/100 or gig symmetrical without latency of less than 100 milliseconds. So again, it's not required, but there's all these different opportunities to make your applications more competitive, earn more points, so you can fare well in BEAD. So open access, and this is our second to last secondary category. We are looking to award points based on an applicant's provision of open access, wholesale, last mile broadband service for the life of the subsidized networks on fair, equal, and neutral terms for all. So there are 3 different categories that applicants can earn points on. If you submit qualifying evidence for all 3, you'll earn 3 points. You can get 2 points if evidence is submitted for 2 out of the 3 categories. But if you can only meet 1 category, that will not earn you any points. So we're looking for a clear description of those services and associated rates. We're looking for evidence of ISP retail partners. So, maybe it's not an executed contract, but it's a letter of intent or an MOU, some sort of indication that that partnership is underway should this project be awarded. And the third option is evidence of a publicly available policy. So let's say you post it on your website, marketing materials, some effort showing that this policy is sort of live and out there and available for providers to show their interest in. And the last one here is local coordination. So I know this has kind of been a big conversation topic, both among providers and communities who are looking to weigh in on the provider that is ultimately selected to serve their community. So a really important category. I'll walk through kind of the initial clarity here, but just know that more details on how this translates to a numerical score is in development, and we'll be sure to publish that ahead of the NOFO opportunity. So overall, there's kind of two buckets here: evidence of community support and then community financial commitment. Across the board, we're looking at the breadth and depth of community support for a project. So on the left-hand side, we have a couple of examples here. This could be letters of support, but we're not looking for, 50 letters. We really want to see quality over quantity, showing meaningful engagement with local communities. This could be a personalized letter from a local library or a city council person or a mayor, even a resident or a small business who's excited about this service. Perhaps this project fits into their community plan. Maybe there was a sort of poll or survey done of residents, evidence of holding a community meeting and any sort of input from there. We're also really interested in evidence of coordinating with local permitting bodies, plans for accessing or getting easements granted, working with a local farm bureau. So anything that shows that, you've meaningfully engaged with folks on the ground and they are excited about and supportive of this initiative. The second bucket here within local coordination is verified financial commitment from the community. So a couple of examples of this outside of just a financial contribution could be access to assets like light poles, conduit, rooftops, perhaps waived permit fees, donated space in a local library or a community meeting center for digital literacy classes, or opportunity to access the right of way. So this is, similar to evidence of local community support, but more with a really clear dollar value behind it. And again, we will release more specific guidance, and happy to hear any of your feedback as you're starting to think through this. So finally, we just wanted to share this bird's eye view of a crosswalk between the scoring rubric in round 4, the BEAD program, and round 3. So if you did participate in round 3, you can kind of see how the scoring criteria line up. We're trying to retain as much continuity as we can, while also following the requirements of the BEAD program and building something that will be sustainable, help us invest in successful, effective projects, while also making sure it is as accessible as possible for all types of providers who are applying. So I know this was quite a lot of information, but hopefully was informative, and I've seen some questions in the chat that we can look through. But just a reminder that our next webinar is next Wednesday. And if you haven't signed up for our intake form, please do so you can learn about our webinars and lots of other resources. So we will look in the chat here and kick it off. All right. A question: will the slides and recording be made available? The answer is yes. If you registered, you'll get these via email either tonight or tomorrow by the end of the week latest. They're also on our BEAD website. That's where everything will be stored, so I can drop a link to that in the chat. Does the new NTIA guidance of alternative technologies impact Illinois' plans in any way? Seems like that was your initial plan in pursuit of connecting everyone. I think it would not impact sort of the structure of our plans. We always built in the wave 3 to leave room for more direct negotiations and creativity to make sure that every last location is connected. So I think all that this does is open up the opportunity for alternative technologies to kind of tap into where needed. Looks like Stephen shared a link to a dashboard contextualizing how the extremely high cost per location threshold should be set. Thank you for re-upping that one. We'll be sure to take a look. Can the pricing increase over the lifetime of the useful life of the funded network? I'm assuming that you mean the monthly pricing. Deb, we'll have to verify in the volume 2, but I believe that it does increase based on the CPI, or the reference price increases based on the CPI. Will Illinois accept in-kind matches? Yes. We'll have guidance in the notice of funding opportunity for what sort of evidence we would look for in-kind matches. We'll just want to do our due diligence to make sure that there is a true financial value behind it. But certainly, yes, in-kind can contribute to the matches.
Hey, and Devin, just I can add one thing on that, by the way, especially for the federal grant geeks on the call here. I mean, in general, Illinois is going to follow mostly the Part 200 rules. I mean, NTIA has provided a little bit of guidance there, but what you're really going to see is, the Illinois definition of allowable cost and in-kind match. We're largely going to just follow what's permitted under the Part 200 rules. So more detail to come, but we're not planning anything particularly unusual or different from that baseline.
Is there a link to a PAU map that will be used? Yes. So what we have online right now is kind of the pre-challenge process map. So if you want to get an early look at, which locations might be eligible, we can resend along that link. I think it's also on our website, and I'll just find that link while we're talking here. This is our BEAD website, and if you click on Sub-Grantee selection process, that's where all the webinars will be stored, but there's a landing page for each kind of bucket of topics here. So there is also a preliminary set of PAUs that are published on our Illinois broadband map. I believe that is in the PAU RFI section of this website. It's subject to change because we are awaiting final approval from NTIA on our PAU map, on our BEAD map. And so it will be released as soon as we have it and as soon as it is incorporated in the map and tested, but at least 30 days prior to the launch of the application process. And Tim says he's new. Is this considered round 4 of wave 1? So there have been 3 previous rounds of Connect Illinois, which was a completely separate funding source, the Capital Projects Fund, State Rebuild Funds. This will mark a shift over to the BEAD-funded round 4. So same branding, but different rules based on the NTIA funding source of the BEAD program. And so this is kind of kicking off as we speak. And I would suggest checking out some of those previous webinars and BEAD 101 on the homepage of what I just shared to just get all the context. And we're happy to answer questions over email as well. All right. Thank you for reviewing the scoring criteria. This was helpful information. Do you have any recommendations for local governments or entities providing letters of support to have an ask of ISPs if they are providing a letter of support, such as requiring Department of Transportation or permitting coordination or low-cost plans within a certain threshold? That is a great question. I'm happy to point you to some resources and kind of like an interview guide or questions to ask offline if you want to shoot me an email. But just off the top of my head, I would think about, what are you as a county looking for from your provider? So your community, your needs. What questions might you ask about affordable plans, speeds associated with those affordable plans, timing, adherence to permitting processes. Think about kind of like the best case scenario of working with a provider and getting service, and then maybe a more challenging scenario. So I would just suggest kind of thinking through that, doing some research into the provider, asking questions, and then deciding if you want to provide that letter of support based on that due diligence that you've done. If you are very supportive of that provider, I think that's a great opportunity to support them in their application by offering those waived permit fees or expediting of right-of-way access, permit access, things like that. I know that some communities like to work out community benefits agreements where a provider might hire from the local community. So all of these require a different level of timing and effort and are based on the preference of the community and the provider, but that's just some food for thought. For clarification, if the project is 100% fiber, the $30 pricing threshold does not apply. So every project is required to have a low-cost affordability plan for $30 for households that meet that criteria, and we'll cover that in a future upcoming webinar. What this looks at is affordability overall. So looking at those general packages that you're offering to all of your customers, if it is a 100% fiber project, what is the cost that you will offer for gigabit symmetrical service? And if it is $100 or less, you'll have the opportunity to earn more points. If it's more than $100, you'll be earning fewer points. So it's kind of a reference cost, but it does not change the affordable plan requirement. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, Devin, maybe just the thing it's a little bit like the match thing from a minute ago. There are two totally separate BEAD issues. So issue one, as Devin just said, there is a low cost plan requirement. It is not scored. It is a requirement. It is the $30, but that is specifically for a 100 downstream, 20 meg upstream offer. So everyone has to do that. That's a requirement of BEAD in Illinois. It's not scored. Then there's a separate element, which is if you're 100% fiber, what price point will you offer for gigabit symmetrical? That is what is scored, and that then goes into the selection of a given grant. So just they both are about affordability, but two totally separate issues.
Thanks, Sean. I know that one's a little bit confusing, so we're happy to help clarify or talk through that further. Has Illinois received approval for their challenge process? So this is that final BEAD map results that I mentioned before. We are still in the waiting game working with NTIA on that. So that's kind of the big piece here, that once we do have approval, we can get rolling on publishing those final PAs ahead of the BEAD sub-grantee process. When can we expect the reference costs to be published by the state? Definitely after our map is approved, probably around or right before the time that the map is published. So we'll kind of put out a package of here's the map, here's our guidebook, here's FAQs, so you can start running those numbers on your end. Does the affordable criteria take care of any potential low cost requirements or ACP compliance if reinstated? To John's point, it's not the affordability criteria, but there is an affordable plan requirement. So it is built in that if ACP comes back, grantees will need to participate in ACP and offer that $30 plan that would then be subsidized by ACP. In the event that ACP is not around, there is still a requirement to offer a $30 plan for residents who meet the criteria of ACP. All right, well, we got a few minutes left, so we'll hang on the line for a bit longer. Again, you know, this is a brand new program. There's lots of historic learnings, both from Connect Illinois here in this state and beyond. But there's a lot about BEAD that is different. So if you have feedback, concerns, ideas, we just really encourage you to reach out either to me or broadband@illinois.gov, because we know that this program will only work if we have as much participation as possible from a really diverse group of providers. So I know a lot of this is complicated. We are trying our best to get information out there in a clear way, and incorporate your feedback, but please keep talking to us and letting us know. So Tim, your question, that is not the PAUs, but if you shoot me an email afterwards, I can get you the map to the PAUs. And I think it's actually, check out this link. And you should be able to find it there. It's called Illinois Broadband Map Project Area Unit Layer. Stephen has a question. Do you envision potential scenarios in which a provisional priority project award is rescinded after the threshold is determined? So after the threshold is determined, provisional awardees who are above the threshold will have the opportunity to revise their costs, their budget, or their technology to come down within the threshold. So there is an opportunity that they might be, I guess, replaced with another project based on that threshold. John, I don't know if you want to add any color on that one.
Yeah, we sort of get into these metaphysical questions of what does a provisional award mean at what point in the process. I mean, I think that the key point is the state has to work through all of that math of what's the budget before it can really say this is our provisional award. So I guess technically it's not really about rescinding an award. It's more the state will figure all that out before it says here are our provisional winners.
Yeah, I would expect some movement as those thresholds are calculated, hence why nothing will be published outside of the areas that are already claimed. All right. Well, we are right at time. Really productive session today. So thank you again for attending. We will send out a recap, and then I'll put our email in the chat if you have any follow-up questions, feedback, ideas, topics that you would like to see. We are at broadband@illinois.gov. Thank you so much. Happy Wednesday.
Thank you, Devin. We'll see you back here next Wednesday. See you all then.